Greetings, this is Angelus de Mortiel with a multiplayer build guide for Dragon Age Inquisition. Today we will look at building a control tank using the Templar class. Comparatively, a control tank expands the traditional tank roles of drawing enemy aggro and taking all the damage. A control tank also buffs allies and debuffs or debilitates enemies. Generally speaking, it is a delicate juggling act of crowd control and tanking. The build actually has a bit of flexibility depending on your team, but mostly focuses on shaping the flow of enemies, funneling them into the line of fire of your DPS teammates. This concept synergizes well with AoE damager classes like the Elementalist, Reaver, and Alchemist. With the Templar control tank, I have built the skills like this. Let's start with the Divine Tree. Blessed Blades could be incredibly useful, but unfortunately when forced to choose only 4 skills, it ended up being skipped in this build, and thus the incredibly useful upgrade was also skipped. Champions of the Just is the first demon-specific passive, granting a 10% damage bonus against demons and a +3 to strength, which increases attack by 1.5% and guard damage bonus by 3%. It is important to note the demon-specific skills for another important passive I will show later. But first, Maker's Will. This is a passive that gives the entire party, regardless of distance from you, a 5% chance to weaken enemies, which makes them do less damage to you. While the passive team buffs are awesome in general, this synergizes well with classes like the Arcane Warrior, whom has passives that expand the effects of weaken. This also adds a +3 to willpower, granting a 1.5% bonus to attack and 1.5% magic resistance. And now for the most important passive for the Templar, Mage Slayer. This takes any active or passive abilities that are specific to demons, like Champions of the Just that I previously mentioned, and applies the effect to mages and magical creatures. This means that Venatori mages, Venatori spellbinders, Red Templar knights, horrors and shadows, and the behemoths are now all affected by any abilities that are specific to demons. There might be more on this list, but that's what I've confirmed to be affected. I cannot stress enough how important this passive becomes with the primary abilities of the Divine Tree. Mage Slayer also adds another +3 to willpower, giving another 1.5% to attack and 1.5% to magical resistance. Valiant is the multiplayer class-specific passive that boosts the primary and secondary attributes of the class. In the Templar's case, it gives a +5 to willpower, increasing attack by 2.5% and magic resistance by 2.5%. And a +4 to Constitution, increasing health by 20 points and melee defense by 2%. Doesn't sound like a lot, but in the end all these little bonuses adds up. There is No Darkness is another passive team buff that grants the party a 10% resistance to all elements, fire, ice, electric, and spirit. As it sounds, this is never a bad thing. This passive also grants another +3 to willpower, adding another 1.5% to attack and 1.5% to magic resistance. And now to the first of the Templar's core active abilities, Spell Purge. This acts like the mage's Dispel ability, only emanates in a 5-meter radius from the Templar rather than being a targetable AoE. It costs a low 35 stamina and has a 24-second cooldown. Most importantly, Spell Purge is an Eldritch Detonator, which I will cover later. I recommend upgrading Spell Purge with the Spell Shatter perk, which deals 600% weapon damage when dispelling beneficial magics on an enemy. The primary use for this is on those pesky wraiths and despair demons and horrors that love to bury themselves frequently. Next, we have Bear Mauls the Wolves passive, which now makes it so that you no longer suffer extra damage when being flanked, usually by those shadows and stalkers that stab you in the back. You have a reduced chance of also being staggered if you are attacked from the front, and you gain another +3 to Constitution, which gives you 15 points to health and increases your melee defense by 1.5%. After that, you will want to take the almost essential Deep Reserves passive. This increases stamina regeneration by 50% once your stamina is below half. I say this is almost essential because the Templar has some trouble keeping stamina up in juggling all of its skills. Deep Reserves also adds a +3 to Strength, granting a 1.5% bonus to attack and a 3% guard damage bonus. Sometimes you die. In multiplayer, if you die, it makes all of the enemies stronger against your teammates. Why not make your teammates stronger too? The Last Sacrifice passive does just that, giving all teammates a 100% bonus to health and 50% bonus for 10 seconds. This is a pretty big team buff that is again not capped by distance from the Templar, which is amazing. As with all on-death passives, it has a 60-second cooldown, however. Last Sacrifice also adds another +3 to Constitution, giving 15 points to health and increasing melee defense by 1.5%. Now to the Pinnacle Templar ability, Wrath of Heaven. This is one part AoE stun, acting as a combo primer, and one part vaporize anything. As the damage of Wrath of Heaven is normally applicable only to demons, this is where Mage Slayer passive earns its salt, spreading that damage to at least 6 more enemy types in 2 other factions. Wrath of Heaven deals 700% weapon damage to those enemies and stuns those enemies and everything else for 6 seconds within a 4-meter area emanating from the Templar. It costs a high 65 stamina and has a 24-second cooldown. I highly recommend upgrading it with the Embrace the Light perk, granting an additional 300% weapon damage for a 1000% damage total, and another 2 seconds of stun for a total of 8 seconds. And now a word on combos. The Templar has both a combo primer and a combo detonator in the Divine Tree. Wrath of Heaven is a stun primer, and Spell Purge is an Eldritch detonator, which typically is reserved for mages. This means the Templar is one of the few classes that can create her own cross-class combos. When casting Spell Purge while enemies are stunned from Wrath of Heaven, it triggers a weakness combo, which does massive damage and inflicts weaken. To make it easier, Wrath of Heaven has a 4-meter radius and Spell Purge has a 5-meter radius, meaning that you can take a step or two and still detonate all the stunned enemies. While this is the most obvious use, and really one of the biggest ways it makes the Templar an excellent class, it is only the beginning. For example, stunning a group with Wrath of Heaven allows rogues to use precision detonators to do the Rupture combo, which does massive damage over time and ignores armor. Furthermore, Spell Purge can be used on enemies afflicted with sleep for a Nightmare combo, which does massive damage and inflicts panic. Moving on to the Sentinel tree. You start automatically with Shield Wall, which is a basic blocking skill for sword and shield warriors. It is important to note that blocking builds guard, which is the most important way to keep your Templar alive in tough situations. However, while Shield Wall generates guard based upon the amount of damage you block with your shield, it also consumes stamina proportionate in a similar fashion. In other words, just because you can block that boss enemy's heavy attack doesn't mean you should. Dodging may be a better option in some cases. It should also be known that Shield Wall stops stamina regeneration while you have it active. Chevalier's Step is an upgrade that synergizes with the Templar's other teammate buffs, adding a 30% bonus to allies' armor. However, those teammates must be within 4 meters of you when you have Shield Wall active. More importantly, Chevalier's Step effectively doubles your movement speed while Shield Wall is active. It's still slow, but much less slow than Shield Wall without it. Turn the Bolt is an important early passive as it halves range damage from enemies in front of you. Anyone who has run into a squad of Venatori archers, even on threatening difficulty, knows just how painful ranged attacks are, tearing through your shield wall by depleting your stamina, then your guard and health shortly thereafter. It also adds a +3 to Constitution, giving 15 points to health and increasing melee defense by 1.5%. Next is Trust the Steel. Simply put, it gives you a 20% armor bonus to your guard. Just note that if you have no guard generated, this bonus does not apply. This also adds another +3 to Constitution, giving 15 points to health and increasing melee defense by 1.5%. It sounds like a sister passive to Turn the Bolt, but by its description, Turn the Blade actually is not a damage reduction of melee attacks, but rather all attacks coming from in front of you, meaning that ranged attacks are also reduced even further by this passive, as well as everything else by the flat 20%. It also adds a +3 to Constitution, giving another 15 points to health and increasing melee defense by 1.5%. Biggest Threat is a necessary skill for any class wanting to be a tank. It increases your threat by 25%, meaning that enemies will be 25% more likely to target you as opposed to your squishy allies. This synergizes well with threat reducing skills your team may be using, like Aura of Peace and Easy to Miss. This also adds a +3 to Constitution, giving yet another 15 points to health and increasing melee defense by 1.5%. And now to the controversial skill that may or may not be what rounds this class out: Line in the Sand. Line in the Sand effectively creates a wall of champion spirits similar in function to Ice Wall. The enemies have to go around in order to attack you. The difference is that Line in the Sand leaves a gap in the middle where the Templar is standing at the time of casting. The wall forms on either side of you. Initially, this has a 6 meter size, meaning that the wall extends for 3 meters on either side of you. You'll see one champion spirit on either side of you. It costs a low 35 stamina and lasts for 12 seconds with a 20-second cooldown. If you want to use Line in the Sand, you're almost required to get the upgrade and no further. While its description is a bit misleading, this actually adds 3 meters on each side of the wall, effectively doubling its width. This is illustrated by an additional champion spirit being added on either end, meaning that 2 spirits are on your left and 2 spirits are on your right. Now I say that Line in the Sand is controversial. Why? Well, first and foremost, it sometimes just plain doesn't work. I've noted countless occasions where enemies just run right through it. It does not happen all the time, but it's usually painful for your archers or mages that enemies immediately tear into afterwards. This is obviously a bug and hopefully will be fixed in the future. However, if that bug is a result of server synchronization or some such, it may not happen. However, when it does work, it can block most doorways effectively without you needing to stay in the middle if you stand off to one side of the door when you cast it. Secondly, many misunderstand that it not only can block a choke point, but it can create one. After casting Line in the Sand, the champion spirits are fixed in place blocking, but you are not, meaning that you can move and leave a deliberate 3 meter hole in the wall, which means if placed well, acts as a perfect way to lure enemies into crowding together for Wrath of Heaven or another teammate's AoE ability. I have found this Templar build to be an effective component to a good perilous team. Not only does it do what a tank should do, but also further impedes enemy movement with crowd control abilities. This lets the damager classes that can do crowd control focus that little bit more on just inflicting damage. Now, as with all builds I will be doing for Inquisition, this is not the best build, or in any way implying that there is only one way to build a class. Sure, some may be better than others for certain situations, but this game allows for a lot of equally viable diversity. This build was made for a specific task, which is tanking mixed with crowd control. Have another way to build a Templar? Feel free to comment. Once again, if you liked the video, feel free to like, comment, or subscribe. This is Angelus de Mortiel signing off.